The advice and opinions expressed by Dr. Grant-Pichet and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice.
Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Grant-Pichet.
Dr. Grant-Pichet.
Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet.
Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. My child's father and I don't agree on doing ABA. Truthfully, I'm not sure that we even agree on our son's diagnosis. He believes our son is fine and will grow out of it. I believe we need to do a lot of ABA. We can barely have a conversation. What advice do you have? How do I get him to see that we will be letting our son down if we don't get him the help he needs? Can I add that I think that my ex is undiagnosed and this is the real issue? He thinks he turned out fine and our son will too. Meanwhile, our marriage ended because he is so rigid and can't see anyone else's perspective.
Oh,
I know.
that is, oh my gosh, so many layers on top of each other
Yes.
on this one.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was going to start by saying clearly, and again, it always helps when it's a live question because we can ask questions back to the person who wrote or called in. But the thing is that, clearly your ex is in denial. And I assume, right? I mean, I assume there's a diagnosis done and this dispute is not just based on opinion.
And we're talking about denial about the child, not about the ex's diagnosis, the child's diagnosis.
Yes, the child's diagnosis. And my assumption is that there is a formal diagnosis. So let's just start there because sometimes parents argue and one believes strongly that the child has a diagnosis and the other one believes strongly that the child doesn't. And they haven't sought out professional advice. So let's just start with that. Like, I assume that you have a professional diagnosis for your child. If you don't, you definitely need to get one. And you may also get two. You might get one from someone that your husband respects or believes is enough of an authority, right? So that's probably very important to do to begin with. Now, secondly, there are situations like I do a lot of secondary diagnoses because it's not an uncommon situation, especially if a child is very high functioning. It does happen that one parent may think this is not a big deal, this is going to go away. And there's a lot of reasons behind it. In your case, it sounds like maybe your husband, also your ex, also has some of the symptoms or whatever it might be. For whatever reason, they don't want to accept a diagnosis. And so I would think a little bit more about why do they not want to accept a diagnosis. Maybe it touches too close to home. Like maybe they think, hey, if my child, he's so similar to me. If he gets diagnosed, maybe that means there's something wrong with me as well. Or maybe a lot of parents are just are not comfortable with accepting the fact that their child might have a disorder or a diagnosis of something that is as all-encompassing as autism. So, having denial over the diagnosis is not unusual because it's a very overwhelming experience, right? So instead of kind of fighting it, I think it's more important to just move past that. If you have a diagnosis, a formal diagnosis, the next step becomes treatment, right? And you don't need to harp on the fact that treatment follows a diagnosis. It does. I mean, every treatment requires a diagnosis, but just maybe it would be helpful if you sat with your ex and discussed the goal of treatment as opposed to the diagnosis itself. In other words, okay, whether or not he has a diagnosis, we're not going to fight over. But do you think it would be beneficial for him to maybe get some help, tutoring, with his social behavior or with his language or with his academics, whatever the issues might be for that child. And maybe start there and see, if it's possible for your ex to accept that, okay, maybe your child could use some help. And then he will definitely be clear of it. In other words, instead of fighting and saying, there's definitely a diagnosis here and things are going to be horrible if we don't do something about it. Just look at it in a different way and just avoid the conversation about diagnosis and say, okay, fine, maybe he doesn't have a diagnosis, but look at his academic problems or look at his social. Can we at least get some help for that? So kind of go based on that premise. That might help. It is difficult if with all exes, divorced families, it's very difficult when there's disagreement. There is a possibility also, if it gets too dire and you feel that your child definitely needs ABA and your ex is not allowing that, there are mediators whose job it is to sit down, evaluate the child. And the way that you go about it actually is that the child gets you get an attorney for your child. And that person then decides what is best for the child when parents in divorce situations cannot come to an agreement.
I love all the things that you said because I feel that so many families are in this position, right? Where I recently said speaking at a TACA conference, because somebody asked a question that was similar, like how do you get on the same page with an ex-husband? And I said, I don't have that experience, but I feel like the expectation always is that at some point, even married couples are on the same page about treatment. And I don't know anybody who's on the same page 100% of the time, all of the time. It's always a negotiation because you're parenting. And I know the flip side of it too from so many friends that the other parent is absentee. And they tell me, man, it's all on me, and I wish that there was somebody to run ideas by. So I think it's hard no matter which situation you're in, but certainly this ex, when they are in denial about even the diagnosis, I think, I gotta say, I think it's extra hard. So I love this. So Sarah had written in and said, understand he is mourning, a loss can be reflected in denial. I think we can all agree with that, right? Because I know, most of us, myself, I was in denial about my son's diagnosis for a while. And it was simply from a place of fear. And I didn't want that for him because I didn't know what it was. So you're right, fear at the base of it. I didn't know if I could handle it. I didn't know if I would know what to do. And I had a vision board of what his life was going to look like, and it didn't look like being in ABA therapy. Now, it ended up that was our story, and I'm totally in acceptance of it, and I feel like I'm a better human being because of it. Yeah. But if you had asked me that in year one, I would have given you a different answer.
100%, Shannon. And this whole, obviously I haven't gone through it myself, but I have met a lot of parents, and it really is a very, very courageous decision to accept the diagnosis, because that's the first step to getting help. And sometimes that can take forever, like a really long time. I mean, I have parents who, if they accepted the diagnosis when the child was younger, a lot could have been done, right? And and this often happens to children who are minimally affected. So, high functioning kids. So kids that are minimally affected, and parents don't realize that there are a lot of things that can be done for those children, especially helping them just understand social behavior better, will help them with succeeding in life in so many ways. And we don't want to take those opportunities away from our kids, but it is so difficult a pill to swallow, the diagnosis, that it happens quite frequently. And when you have divorce in the situation, it's so much worse, because now there's animosity and the two parents don't want to talk, and there's just Oh, it's not good. It's not good.
Don't forget, you can watch Ask Dr. Doreen live every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We hope to see you there.